are some Americans you've probably never met before. 50 million young Americans who, with their parents, make 130 million Americans who've never heard of the Dodgers or the Cubs or listened to Charlie McCarthy. But they are just as much Americans as we are, with the same ideals that we have. How strange it is that we in the United States know so little about these neighbors of ours in the 20 American republics south of the Rio Grande. Their homeland stretches from Texas through Central America to Cape Horn on the very tip of South America, an area more than twice as large as the United States. Almost 450 years ago, 1 year after Columbus had accidentally discovered the New World, the first settlers arrived from Spain and Portugal. They spread from the islands of the Indies to the Isthmus of Panama, Mexico, and then over the mainland of South America. Colonies were established, but it was still adventure's land, Mecca for mariners and mariners. Them it was literally a new world. But then 100 years later, across the North Atlantic, out of it came the French and English. We think of the Pilgrims as the first Americans. Actually, when they were floundering off Massachusetts in the Mayflower, there was already a third generation of Americans in the Western Hemisphere. These were concentrated in that area, which today is Brazil. The rest of South America, plus Mexico, Texas, Arizona, and California, was all part of New Spain. A goodly area of these colonies was unexplored, for the towns were built mostly on the seacoast and rivers. Barriers which hindered explorers were the Andes Mountains, a monstrous range similar to our own Rockies, only 7,000 feet higher. It presented a sheer, insurmountable wall running the whole length of South America. Another obstacle was the Amazonian jungle, a vast, dark swampland, steaming with fever. But America was not all menace. It was the land of plenty along the fertile reaches of high plateaus, land from 1 to 2 miles high. There was wealth, too, in the low-lying pampas, an interminable prairie whose lush, black topsoil was 10 feet thick in sections, making it more fertile than our own Middle West. And like our country, the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans washed their shores. But unlike our country, the original Indian inhabitants were not savage nomads. Here in Mexico, on the site of what is now Mexico City, was the capital of the ancient Aztec Empire. The people that piled such stones as these into once beautiful cities had maintained a high degree of civilization for 1,000 years before the coming of their Spanish conquerors. Hernando Cortez and a handful of ironclad conquistadores, still commemorated in these Indian dances, ravaged the Aztec Empire, leaving little of their culture to history save a few tumbled stones and the folklore of these dances. On another continent, another great Indian race, the Incas, built their capital city, Cusco, high on the shoulders of the Andes. When the rest of the Americas was still just a blank on the maps of Columbus, this city was a thriving center of culture. But the year 1533 brought the swords and torches of Francisco Pizarro. He was a Spaniard who marveled that these monstrous stones could be cut and hauled and set without mortar, and that crops could be grown on the flanks of the Andes by means of these terraces. But all the ingenuity of the Incas could not stop the inroads of the Europeans. For over 300 years after they were founded, New Spain and Portuguese Brazil were bound to their mother countries. From 18 on, the chains of colonial slavery were broken by one revolt after another. The outpost of European empires became the capital cities of 20 independent republics. Cities like Buenos Aires, with a population of 3 million people, and Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, with another 2 million, Santiago, Mexico City, Lima, Montevideo, all are evidence that America could stand alone and prosper. These cities look much like pictures we've seen of the big cities of Southern Europe, for they have kept some of the culture of their mother countries. But however indebted the Americas were to Europe for culture received, the debt was repaid 1,000-fold with the products of their fields and mines. Notice that although the chains of government were broken, the chains of commerce still tied the new continent with the old. For centuries after the conquest, the colonies were by law forbidden to trade with any but the mother country. The roads of commerce all led to Europe, where a ready market kept them open long after the republics were formed. These countries extended their trade to Asia and the rest of the world, but they traded little with each other. Rivalries, traditions, high tariffs, and above all, lack of roads and railways were chiefly responsible. The Second World War has cauterized the arteries of trade like a red-hot knife, and both Latin America and the United States are realizing that they cannot depend on Europe, that they must trade with each other, and that means buying as well as selling. Boats are scarce, but the air is a superhighway, and modern airlines are doing much to make our good neighbors into next-door neighbors. American planes and pilots flying intra-continental routes are also helping the South American countries to know each other. A traveler out of Buenos Aires flies so high he must breathe through an oxygen tube. But he lands in Santiago, Chile in a few hours, a journey that once took days by temperamental railroad and bus, or weeks sailing around the Horn. The science of instant communication has also helped unite the Western Hemisphere. With this network of radio and telephone, a banana planter buried in the jungle of Guatemala can talk to an importer in New Orleans, or our own Secretary of State can talk to the Foreign Minister of Venezuela. Just as communication of words must be two-way, so too with ideas. Portinari, the great Brazilian artist, is almost unknown in our country. His paintings and those of the Argentine artist, Molina Campos, would do much to help us understand the other Americas. The great Brazilian composer, Villa-Lobos, is known to few North Americans, and yet the Latin Americans know a great deal more about us than we do about them. They are anxious to receive our artists and are eager hosts to the students we send to study at their universities. They read the same books we do, everything from Ernest Hemingway to Tailspin Tommy. They see the same movies that we do, and Hollywood has taught them that we are not all gangsters and cowboys, any more than they are all headhunters and gauchos. The best way for them to know us is to meet us. When this American cruiser pulled into Rio on a goodwill visit, a lot of Uncle Sam's blue-clad nephews were surprised at the number of people who spoke to them in English. Yet not one of the sailors could speak Portuguese, and they certainly were baffled by those Brazilian newspapers. George Washington is well known down here. Yet have you ever heard of Jose San Martin, the liberator of Argentina, or of General O'Higgins, the Irish hero of Chile? These nations have a history as proud as our own, and their arsenals, like ours, are dedicated to the defense of the 21 American republics. If there's a new world to be made, it is youth who will draw the blueprints and do the building. Just as our boys and girls work on farms throughout the United States, so the young people of Latin America are doing their share in the agricultural and industrial life of their countries. The continent of South America might well be called nature's treasury. Practically every raw material needed by man can be found somewhere between the Rio Grande and the Straits of Magellan. Brazil fills the coffee cup of the world, supplying almost 70% of all that is consumed. And the young people of Brazil are as familiar with the raising of coffee as a Kansas farm boy is with corn. And the next time you sit down at a soda fountain, remember that some boy in Central America had to work pretty hard to supply the foundation for your banana split. Our southern neighbors raise enough sugar to supply the sweet tooth of the world, and our neighbors' children help cut the cane. Others guard their llamas, which we call llamas, carrying loads high in the Andes. Some work in the big meat-packing houses or frigorificos, while others man the big presses of newspapers, as modern as any in our country. Thousands of children spend all their lives on huge ranches or estancias in the Argentine. Here they become expert cowboys, the match of any cactus-bred kid west of Kansas. Overcoats on the hoof take a lot of watching, and the youth of South America helps to herd a good deal of the world's wool and mutton. The youth of the other Americas have an investment in the good earth of their countries. Copper, nitrate, tin, and manganese. We need these for our defense and prosperity, and buying them from South America would help their defense and prosperity. But parts of the continent haven't changed since the days of the Spanish conquest. In remote mountain lakes, we can still find the primitive dugout canoes of the back Indians, who fish with the same methods that their ancestors used centuries before Columbus set sail. In the crowded and festive marketplaces of unmapped villages, these people do their part toward keeping the smallest capillaries of commerce open and flowing. Their folk arts, such as the weaving of reeds and grasses, have as definite a part in the prospering of their country as any large-scale enterprise. With so much raw material at their disposal, these countries have only recently started to manufacture articles in the field of heavy industry, like this white-hot whip, to be made into steel rails. Just as we apprentice our young people to construction trades, the South Americans are training their youth to hoist and rivet the girders of skyscrapers in cities as modern as ours. Others are becoming aeronautical experts. And so in fields, factories, and laboratories, the youth of the Americas are truly building a new world. In any civilized country, progress depends on three things. We call them reading, writing, and arithmetic. For a long time in Latin America, they were taught only in religious schools, like this girls' academy in Brazil. The instruction was good, but expensive, and most of the children couldn't afford to go. Today, the theory of public schools has been so enthusiastically adopted that even the most remote kindergarten schools are crowded with youngsters and their pets. Primary grades in Mexican schools mix practical training in embroidery with the ABCs. If these little girls were in one of our schools, they wouldn't dare sit near an inkwell. The inability of its people to read and write is the one thing that will keep a country from taking its place in the world. The governments of these countries know this, but until recently they have been hampered by a shortage of school buildings. New ones like this in Chile are constantly being built, and when they are staffed with graduates from teachers' colleges like this, illiteracy in the Americas will be extinct. All the talent of the Americas has been drafted to help in teacher training. Here the great Brazilian composer Villa-Lobos teaches a class in the theory of music. Many North American institutions are cooperating. In Rio, the YMCA, established here for 40 years, has been asked by the government to operate this modern high school for 400 Brazilian boys and girls. But the Y is not alone in this work. Our own Catholic and Protestant church groups are active down here. There are thousands and hundreds of thousands of people in our country, too, who, like this Indian family, have never had an opportunity to go to school. They are bright and intelligent people for the most part, but their lack of education keeps them tied to the primitive customs and culture of their ancestors. Their leaders know this, however, and throughout the Americas are springing up doby versions of the little red schoolhouse. Tropical America, the jungle, dank, dripping, where the water is soupy with fever and the very air seems heavy with infection. Malaria, typhoid, dysentery, tuberculosis, malnutrition, tapeworm, and venereal disease. This is the roster of the enemies of American youth in this area. But medical colleges and hospitals, which cost millions of dollars, are desperately needed to combat the Panzer divisions of disease. In the equatorial countries, the biggest problem is fever. The next problem is getting the money to fight it. Research and study, as well as medicine, costs a great deal. Medical institutions, like the great one in Brazil, named for Oswaldo Cruz, an eminent South American scientist, are often endowed with money from the United States. It was in laboratories like these that yellow fever was eliminated from Brazil. But research alone never cured anybody. A network of clinics brings relief to people who can't afford their own physician. Quinine tastes bitter. Still, in this town, 1/3 of all the people have malaria. And many still have defective teeth. The training of visiting nurses is helping to solve the problem of public health in the more remote regions, just as it is done in our own backwoods communities. Free milk stations help mothers combat malnutrition in their children, a condition no less common here than it is among the sharecroppers and slum dwellers of the United States. Away from the big cities and miles into the backcountry can be found medical stations like this, where the Indians can get competent clinical treatment for diseases that were brought to them by the conquest. Up-to-date equipment and modern operating rooms have enlarged the scope of these rural clinics. A great many of these people used to rely on home-brewed medicine and superstition to cure their ailments. Now, for the first time, they can get anything from an appendectomy to an old-fashioned dose of castor oil. Here, a native doctor explains to a group of children the importance of boiling drinking water to prevent dysentery. They are learning what their elders found out so late, that the strength of a country is the strength of its people. Here, a whole group of gauchos set off for a picnic festival on the Argentine Pampas. Our good neighbors to the south probably appreciate the value of recreation more than we do. We work so hard at it that we don't enjoy it. But be it a picnic or a polo game, these youngsters rank at the top among sportsmen of the world. Only recently taking up track and field events, the Latin Americans have become quite expert and promise to supply material for some future Olympic Games. The exciting sweep of 8 oars has run crew racing many devotees, but by far the most popular organized sport is soccer. This game is as popular here as football is with us. Just as in Dubuque or Boston, the boys of South America go to the YMCA for much of their recreation. In this modern, streamlined building, the swimming pool always has its full quota of high divers and dog paddlers. This earnest little chap is out to earn his Y on the chess team. Bullfighting, the traditional sport of old Spain, is popular, not because the people like blood, but because they admire the skill of the matador, and this fella needs all his dexterity. In the Argentine, they play pato, which is like basketball on horseback. It used to be played with a live duck instead of a ball, and was so rough that it had to be forbidden by law. Bolero is the South American yo-yo. Supper clubs and after-theater rendezvous are quite as popular in Latin America as they are on 52nd Street in New York. North American swing music is well known down here, as well as our better vaudeville acts, which are now flocking to Latin America. But their own native music and dances are still the feature of the best entertainment. The best place to see these folk dances is not in a supper club, however. Indian festivals and village fiestas offer real insight on the natural recreation of the people. A sense of humor is universal, and the Argentine artist Molina Campos is to his gaucho countrymen what Walt Disney is to us. The Argentino is fond of Mickey Mouse and wonders why we are not more familiar with Campos horses. On the dance floor, though, we meet on a common ground. A debutante's party in Mexico City is just as hard to crash as one in Cleveland, Ohio. Good neighbor policy has ceased being a phrase. It is a fact. Military missions from the U.S. Army are being asked to help train Latin American officers, an honor once accorded mainly to Europeans. They in return are sending their officers to our country to exchange information. Better navies and armies are not the only advantage. We are sending our young people down to attend universities that were flourishing when Harvard was a log hut. While there, they live in the homes of their instructors. Their fellow students speak English, and they soon pick up Spanish or Portuguese. Seeing them here in the grandstand at a soccer game, can you tell the North from the South American? But this exchange works both ways. Up from the southern republics come eager, intelligent students to attend our schools, and that word exchange is the secret of being good neighbors. The defense of the hemisphere is not our sole responsibility. We are only one American republic. There are 20 others, and their young people like ours can stand on their own feet. This demonstration protesting a fifth column campaign was composed largely of students. The youth of these countries want us as comrades, standing shoulder to shoulder with them under the flag of freedom. They don't want the European New Order any more than we do. But they know that we must all, the young and the strong, stand together as a united youth, 2 continents, but one hemisphere, 21 liberty-loving republics, Americans all.